Hello everyone, my name is Emily Waller and I am going to be giving you a presentation over a chapter titled Queers, Fairies, and Ne'er-Do-Wells for this week's graduate presentation, or one of this week's graduate presentations anyway. So if you'd like to go ahead and access the handout, you can either scan the QR code that's on the phone screen picture on the left, excuse me, or you can click on the link that's been provided on the computer screen on the right. That will pull up the presentation on the device that you're currently using. If you'd like to go ahead and do that, you can pause the video now. Alright, so jumping right in, we are going to be discussing sexual liberality in New Orleans. We are going to be taking a look at Chapter 8 in Remaking New Orleans, Beyond Exceptionalism and Authenticity. The full chapter's title is Queers, Fairies, and Ne'er-Do-Wells, Rethinking the Notion of a Sexually Liberal New Orleans, and it was written by Alicia P. Long. So the basis of this particular chapter is in the dynamic that was created between the reformers and queer men, particularly in the 50s in New Orleans. However, this has roots all the way back to the early 1800s. Historically, the focus of sexuality in New Orleans has been placed on heterosexual behavior and sexual commerce. However, same-sex behavior was also present and was made illegal by reformers in 1805. Those convicted at the time would be imprisoned in a labor camp for the remainder of their life. However, this law would go through a lot of changes as the years went on. The chapter describes an amendment to the law numbered 69, unintentionally, ironically, that specifically prohibited oral sex between people of the same sex being taken place of, and the specific punishment for that was between 2 and 10 years in a labor camp. However, many judges at the time did not agree with this particular punishment. They did not feel that it fit the crime, and so very often it was not followed. So as we move forward in time to New Orleans in the 1950s, New Orleans went through a period of time where political reformers worked to purge the city of anyone publicly participating in non-gender conforming behavior or same-sex behavior. It was immediately following World War II that there was a significant focus placed on the visibility of homosexuality, and real attempts were made to quell that visibility. Mayor Gillespie Story Morrison, and I apologize if I mispronounced that name, was made mayor, and he was really the front runner for this movement. He didn't really do a whole lot after he was elected immediately. People kind of thought that he was going to come in and clean up the streets. There was actually a whole movement of women who were campaigning for him that walked through the streets of New Orleans and swept the streets with wooden brooms as a way to indicate that he was literally going to be cleaning and sweeping the streets up. However, after the death of a wealthy tourist, Morrison created a morality committee. This was a committee of 13 people that would make judgments on what type of behaviors they were going to deem as objectionable and what the punishment for those behaviors would be. It became very difficult for this committee to really pin down what was going to be the punishment for the behaviors that they were putting in place, because it became clear very quickly that it was going to be difficult to prove that someone was participating in same-sex behaviors unless they were caught in the act. So in order to kind of subvert that problem, they used loitering and charges like that in order to bring people in and charge them. Morrison would later go on to claim, though, that it was not being a sexual deviant that made one immoral, but rather the behavior of those individuals. This is a relatively early example in this movement of stereotyping anybody who was perceived as queer at the time. However, the treatment of same-sex behavior was not standardized at all. Lesbians were never considered a focus of the movement, and queer men that were considered sneaky queens or sneaky fruit were often ignored. Clay Laverne Shaw is a very good example of someone who was considered quietly queer. He was known as a bachelor, which was a polite term often used to describe upper middle class male homosexuals. A police captain was even quoted admitting that it was difficult to arrest people that he described as high-type persons. Clay Laverne Shaw definitely fit this description. He was a very integral person in the community. He was very well liked. He was described as being tall, masculine, and handsome, and so it was much more difficult for people to claim and prove that he was participating in any sort of homosexual behavior because he was so well liked and because he presented very masculinely. One of the ways that queer men were specifically targeted was by making it illegal for gay men to congregate in public or frequent any establishments that sold alcohol. This led to the rise in popularity of gay-friendly bars, and many of these bars would be targeted by the police later. Here are some pictures of a few of those bars and some of the events that took place. So Tony Bacino's was a very well-known gay-friendly bar, as well as Dixie's Bar of Music. These few pictures of some of these men is specifically from Dixie's Bar of Music, and some events that they had that took place that were specifically welcoming to like theme nights and like that kind of thing. So in the case of Maggio et al. Versus the city of New Orleans, Louis or Louise Robichaud and Amos McFarland, whose stage name was Candy Lee, were charged with working at an establishment that sold alcohol. Both men were openly gay, and so it was very easy for the police to come in and charge them because of the bar that they were working at, which actually, if we go back to the last slide, was Tony Bacino's. Both men were arrested 8 times over the course of approximately a week, and Maggio, who was the manager at the bar, who managed the bar at the time, was arrested 4 times as well. This led to the men filing a restraining order. The restraining order was granted on the grounds that their rights were being violated since the officers did not have probable cause to search the premises. There was no reason for the officers to believe that these 2 men were gay at the time because they participated in same-sex behavior specifically within the confines of the bar. And so there was no legal reason for the police to search the bar and arrest these men. That, however, was not the end of the legal affair, as the restraining order was contested by the police. Officers were able to confirm these men's homosexuality based on previous statements and records. Neither men ever admitted in court to participating in same-sex behaviors or specifically being homosexual. Louise Robichaud admitted to participating in same-sex behaviors while at work, however, stressed very, very adamantly to the court that he was married and had a wife at home, and after working, he would go home and he didn't take those behaviors back home to his wife. Amos McFarland had a much harder time defending himself against the police because there was a previous statement on record where McFarland was caught in the act with a soldier having same-sex relations with this soldier, and there was a signed statement by McFarland stating that he had participated in same-sex behaviors with this soldier, and specifically describing the behaviors that took place during their sexual encounter. So here are a couple discussion questions for us. So first, after reviewing the chapter presented and reading Sweet Tea for the week's supplemental readings, do you see any similarities between the historical take given here and the men's personal stories in Sweet Tea? If not, do you see any differences, perhaps? Question 2, queer women were never considered a focus of the staunch morality policing. Why might women have been excluded from reformers? Consider here the dynamic of intersectionality. And then our last question, how would you characterize the difference in treatment of gay men in a higher social standing as opposed to those in a lower social standing? And why was the treatment of perceived immorality executed so differently or so inconsistently, might even be a better word. All right, thank you guys so much for listening.